Good afternoon, everyone. I am absolutely, I don't even have a word to describe how I feel to be in the presence of such stalwarts. But I see these happy faces in front of me. I am a faculty member myself, and I know exactly what it is to get the younger generation absolutely cued in about what's happening around us and what the third pole is all about. So, without much ado, I think I will just move into the whole discussion. So, I would like to say this: I'm a geologist by profession. So, for me, like we had this discussion earlier this morning, where we talked about the fact that environment and ecology and all of these issues, biodiversity, we cannot really think about it with political borders in mind, because there aren't any political borders in any of this. I mean, a butterfly which exists in Bhutan will come over to India. The elephants, they roam freely over all these countries that they share. And so, therefore, the thoughts and the processes and the remedial measures that have to be taken, I guess, have to be thought about in a very holistic manner. So, the present snow caps, that is the North and the South Poles, they are the last vestiges of the colossal Pleistocene ice age. I'm sorry, but I had to bring in geology somewhere, that enveloped the Earth not many million years ago. But closer home, we have the third pole, and that is the entire region of the Tibetan highlands, and it affects not just India, but it also affects all of the countries that are downstream. And that is such a huge matter. So Dr. Sangay this morning, he mentioned about the fact that it's not just about the glaciers melting, but it's also about the permafrost melting and the release of methane, which is going to bring in that much more greenhouse gases. So, without much ado, I think I will just move away and we will engage all our stalwart speakers and we will try and see what exactly we can bring out of them. So, for all you students there and all the faculty members who are here, our esteemed hosts from Royal Global University, and Ranjit, thank you so much for having all of us here for the Eastern Himalayas Nationomic Forum, with the 12th edition of it. So, here we go. So, I'll start with Ramadurai sir. What do you think is the investment, the level of investment, in fact, in research and innovation related to climate change adaptation and environmental conservation and sustainable resource management in the area that we are talking about? And which are the research verticals that should be given more priority? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sunaina. I think the topic is extremely important, and I wish we started it when we are virtually born. Ranjit talked about the future and the youngsters of the future who have to create a different world, and sustainability as a part of any activity has to be integrated into the whole thing. The other day, I happened to hear Dr. Jane Goodall at the Godrej Literary Festival in Mumbai, an 84-year-old lady who started at such an young age with a passion for nature and integrated her whole life into the nature. And what she has achieved and what she is trying to do now in terms of every child wanting to do something, how do we encourage? I think so. The cost equation or the cost question is unquantifiable because it needs to be anything which you do as part of the corporate activity, whether you do it as part of the sustainability activity or as part of the social sector, it must be done. Most importantly, what I am as part of the Mission Karmayogi Bharat is the government of India has embarked on to essentially build the capacity and competency in professionals and civil servants across all levels, starting from the entry level section officers, temporary workers. We are talking about across the country, when you take the state government, 34 million civil servants to be built on competencies of which sustainability becomes one of the key ingredients. In addition to that, how do you implement on the ground through foundations like the Balipara, the Naturenomics, where you know the Eastern Himalayas as much as anybody else, and the importance of this is so crucial that we need to focus on that. To me, the important thing is how do you inculcate a sense of integrating sustainability context, social context, and the whole corporate context has to be a single whole rather than doing in isolation. When you look at the Center for Energy, Environment and Water, of which I am a part of, or the Tata Sustainability Initiatives, I'm sure Tata Power people will talk about it, or the Alingana experiment which is being done by the Tata Group, we need to be spending the money and spending the impact wherever you are located. The last but not the least is the involvement of the communities, and again goes back to the philosophy of the Tata Group, which is more than 160 plus years old, is the community as the center of everything, the ownership of the community through various efforts, and a collaborative effort is an absolute must. So I think I would like to say that we all believe in this, we all practice it, we are propagating it, but more importantly, it's an integrated whole, and there are measurement systems that are possible in every one of this in terms of what is the footprint for the money you spend, and what is the kind of impact each of us creating, and the impact has to be scaled up. And this part of the world, the third pole, becomes so important that without that, the number of people that we affected is unimaginable, and we need to focus on it right away. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And that is such an eye opener for many of us out here, because we are all faculty members who are destined to groom the students for the future. And I think we should all keep that in mind, because that exactly is where the whole crux of the situation starts. So I'll move ahead and I'll move to Dr. Richard Milburn. And I would like you to give us a kind of a little bit about environmental security, which acknowledges that environmental issues can lead to or intensify geopolitical tensions, migration, instability, especially in areas like, India and the surrounding countries, as they affect access to essential resources like clean water, food. So what would be the key strategies that could be adopted for environmental sustainability with the broader national and international security concerns in the third pole and the countries which are affected by the third pole?
Thanks. So I'll try to just run through sort of a few key points, conscious we don't want to overrun for lunch. So I think particularly on the strategic piece, and something that I really try and teach my students back in London is focus and clarity. So if you look at the messaging around climate change, environmental security, there are so many elements to it. There's plastic pollution in the oceans, there's carbon emissions, there's community development. There's a whole series of problems that we're told about and that we have to try and solve. And a lot of them are very, very difficult to do. For those of you studying economics, you probably know the free rider problem and the tragedy of the commons problem. So in terms of carbon emissions, even if a country like India completely decarbonizes, if the rest of the world doesn't follow, then actually, it's not particularly helpful. So what it really comes down to is this notion of sort of grand strategy. So going back to the kind of Cold War periods and saying, what can you do that drives global change by mobilizing that self-interest? So I think there's really two elements. In terms of climate change, as we've already heard, it's fundamentally about energy and clean energy. So 70 to 75% of global emissions come from burning fossil fuels for energy and for transport. So if you can convert that from releasing carbon into zero carbon, you can drop about 70% of global emissions. And at that point, you hit net zero. So from a strategic perspective, really focusing on the technology, the research to get cheap, reliable, clean energy and make it abundant, that's the sort of silver bullet solution for climate change. It doesn't solve everything associated with climate change, but it's the quickest way to hit zero emissions and that ecological balance. And crucially, it's profitable. So instead of this talk about, oh, we need $1 trillion a year to adapt to climate change and there's a cost, you shift it to an investment model. You develop solutions to convert hydrocarbons into hydrogen using renewable energy. So you keep a market for fossil fuels, as opposed to trying to wipe out the oil industry. That'll be very difficult. And then you get a real focus on that cheap, reliable, clean energy. So I think the key from the strategy really is that focus. And then also on adaptation is looking at what you have control over. And I know the sort of geo piece, there's a lot of talk about geoengineering, which can be quite risky, putting things in the clouds to cool the earth. But I prefer geo restoration. So how do you look at what did things look like 20, 30 years ago? What were the ice caps like? And okay, how do you get it back to that situation? And again, wherever possible, how do you develop a business model off that? So even if you're an environmentalist, strategy, understanding commercial approaches to how to achieve things are as important as understanding that ecological knowledge. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. So, which is very important is the fact that I just feel that all our students here and all our faculty members here, we need to also remember this. I would just put in my two bits. The fact that when it comes to climate change, the anthropogenic reasons are a lot less, actually. It's the geogenic reasons which bring about climate change. So we don't really need to work ourselves up into climate anxiety so much, because when you're anxious, you cannot work and you cannot think of the newer things. So whatever Dr. Milburn said is that, when it comes to engineering and all of that, the research which goes behind it will have to be thought about very clearly, and the clarity is the most important thing. Now I'll move over to Mr. Saurav Roy, and we'd like to talk about sustainable. I mean, I'm kind of jumping from one topic to another, but then we have so little time and we have so much to talk about, and I thought that you would all be able to, if you could touch upon as many points as possible, it would be nice for our students. So I thought about talking to you about sustainable tourism, which can actually help conserve this region's fragile ecosystem while providing economic opportunities for the local inhabitants. So what are the aspects that one must keep in mind while addressing this concept, which once again hangs on a very, very thin and very tight rope? Because when we say ecotourism, what are we actually talking about? And how much of eco damage are we doing while we are even advocating all of that? So what are your thoughts about that?
Thank you, Dr. Sarkar, and pleasure to be here. It's my first time at the RGU campus, and I'm stunned at what I see, and I'm stunned at what I see. So, like I said, and I just wanted to pick up from something that Mr. Ramadurai mentioned, and I think since we have the future generation here also, there are many schools of thought, and I've been saying this since morning. There are many schools of thought on conservation, on ecological action. And there's the science and tech school, there's the academic school, there's multiple languages. I think it's important to remember that ultimately this wisdom rests with the people. It's there, and I think one of the efforts possibly needs to be to give that wisdom its rightful place on the table, right? And I think a lot gets addressed if our systems, our processes are relooked at. Maybe the onus lies on us to look at our metrics, our systems, our processes, to make sure that there's, and not confuse that for inclusion, because that is the core agenda. And therefore I think particularly in the third pole, what I see is and Mr. Bhattakur, we've been speaking about this, is peer-to-peer action. Individual networks are phenomenal in their power in the northeastern part of this country and the larger third pole region. More than civil society, more than this thing. I think that peer-to-peer network, if we keep investing in individuals, I think you have the Balipada Awards tomorrow, which looks at individual action. So to me, that's where the challenge lies. And how do you continue to have dialogue? But bringing in science, academia, capital, access to capital. We're also at a time where I think the capital structure of the country, the financial allocations, regulation is also evolving. So what happens in the next 3-4 years is actually seminal in terms of what it might mean for the next 25-30 years of evolution. Ecotourism, since the point that you mentioned, I think our experience from all our interactions, it works at two levels. One is, I think, it gets people into the ecosystem. So it brings both challenges as well as that wisdom, the highs and the lows, onto the table. So that's an important link. If you get in more people to have experiential understanding of what the threats are, of what the challenges are, I think that's a very soft anthropogeny-based link that you have. But like I said, most livelihoods programs, I think at some point tend to prioritize the savings and investment questions more than the conservation questions. And I think there's an understanding of scale that we have, which is a little misguided as far as conservation is concerned. Because to my mind, conservation is a microclimate, microgeology issue. You can have a narrative, but you can't have action which possibly goes beyond a certain scale. So maybe, our metrics of success and the planet's metrics of success are slightly at odds. And if we just get that into our programs, and I've seen that starting to happen. So to me, that's how I would address that.
Thank you so much. I would now like to invite Dr. Sange. And we have already had him speaking with us this morning. And I would like to ask you that what role do national governments and international bodies play in addressing the environmental degradation of the third pole, and how can they collaborate more effectively? I mean, I know that you have already given us a few insights in the earlier session, but I would really like our students to get that knowledge from you as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon, students. Are you guys feeling a little bored? No? No, I'm not asking faculty, students. Faculty will say no. But we must tell you that all of us just spoke at the Balipari Foundation and ran here without eating lunch. So we sacrificed our lunch to come here, okay? So why did I bring lunch? Because we have 8 billion people in the world, right? And we produce food for 10 billion people. Still, there's shortage of food, partly because there's no cold storage, partly because you can't, save food, and a lot is wasted. And then you know that nearly 500 million people in this world, they have barely one meal a day, including in some states or some districts in India. By 2050, we'll have 10 billion people. But the food production by 2035-40 will max out. So there'll be less production of food, but more people. So this is a big challenge. Of these 10 billion people in 2050, 5.6 billion will be in Asia, of which 60% will be living in urban areas. They need water, they need food, they need everything, right? That's why third pole, or the Tibetan plateau, and the whole of Himalaya belt is very important, because that's where the water source is. Now, the moderator asked me, what do the national and international bodies doing? Not much, because if you look at the scientists and the funding, it's more glamorous to study Antarctic and Arctic. More scientists go there. If you look at the videos and photos, it's more attractive to watch the big glaciers melting, and then falling into the ocean. Third pole is treated like I don't want to say third class, but at a third level. So partly because scientists don't have access, because Tibet, if I be political, is occupied. To study third pole, Scientists need unfettered access. They must have objective scientists doing research and sharing the data with the rest of the world. Not much is known what's going on up there. For example, mining is taking place in Tibetan Plateau. There are 132 different kinds of minerals in Tibet, okay? Lots of mining taking place, not just Chinese companies, American companies, Canadian companies, Australian companies taking place. Once there's a mining, what happens? You have to use water, you have to use chemical, then water pollution. Then the people downstream in Assam, Brahmaputra is very important. It originates from Tibet, right? And then what happens with the villagers down here who survive on agriculture and fishery? If the water is polluted, water is getting polluted. And the damming is taking place. In Tibetan rivers, not just 1 or 2, 10, 20 dams are being built. On Brahmaputra, there's a plan to build 12 dams. Already 2 or 3 have already been built. The largest one, they say, will be the largest in the world. More dams you build, water pressure, seismic zone, earthquake happens. And we should not forget Assam. We had one of the biggest earthquake in 1997. Biggest earthquake in 1950. In recent years, there was an earthquake in Sikkim in 2011, Nepal in 2015, where 8,000 people died. We know that. In Afghanistan, earthquake is happening. Damming leads to earthquake. Assam is, you know that, of this earth zone, number 5, which means is the most dangerous earth zone in India. Assam falls at number 5. If there's a major earthquake because of damming that's taking place, what will happen to people in Assam? Militarization thing, Guwahati is such a important military point. Militarization of Tibetan Plateau, again destruction of environment is happening, tension at the border. Now because it's a militarization, a sensitive area, scientists don't get access, they don't study. That's why flora and fauna in Assam area and whole of Northeast are disappearing very fast because a lot of things are happening upstairs, up in the Tibetan area, right? Urbanization, a lot of Chinese are moving in. Tibet as a third world is very fragile. You can't take so much, okay? Population, food, everything. But then a lot of Chinese are moving in. That means urbanization, infrastructure taking place. That leads to pollution, right? Now the glaciers in Tibet are melting very fast. There's 46,000 glaciers in Tibet. 46,000, okay? By 2030, of these glaciers, there'll be less replacement of, you call it snow or glaciers, more of this melting. So 2030 is tipping point. In 6 years' time, more glaciers will melt, less replacement. So down the line, what you're looking at is Mount Everest without snow. Imagine. What happens, people in downstream here in Assam, when you depend on Brahmaputra, some Indian scientists, some Indian military personnel, they say that, oh, Brahmaputra, we don't have to worry because 60% of the water of Brahmaputra is rainfall based. Technically true. But down the line, no. If glaciers melt very fast, if Tibet dries up, there will be no rainfall and there will be no Brahmaputra down the line. So that's why what do national and international bodies do? As I said, so whole from Afghanistan to Pakistan to India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh and Myanmar, you stop there. You have to go further. Get Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, because they all are dependent on water flowing from Tibetan rivers. All must get together and say, we need more funding, like the Antarctic and Arctic. We need more scientists studying this. Because Antarctic and Arctic, when the ice melts, as I said, it goes to ocean. It becomes salt water. It's not drinkable. But the glaciers of Tibet melt. It's a drinkable water for 1.4 billion people. As a third pole as a whole, 3 billion people depend on that. Right? So we must make an urgent case and say, we all need to study this. So that's why the coalition of all these countries forming together and pressing United Nations, pressing COP30 down the line, and Chinese government, and say, please be accountable. Our lives are at stake here.
Thank you so much. And also for pointing out the fact that reservoir-triggered earthquakes are one of the largest earthquake triggers around the world. And like you said, like, the large dams, if they're built there, then that will definitely affect the northeastern part of India, as well as the rest of India. I'll now move over to Mr. Tiwari, and I want to now ask you to talk about a little bit about environmental refugees, which is this looming up in the future. And we know for certain that when there are environmental issues at stake, people will have to move. For instance, even now, we have so many people who are slowly moving out of the large cities in India, moving to smaller villages, giving up their corporate jobs, moving into farming, etc., etc. And it's not always because it's like, they're getting a kick out of it. It's not that. It's also because of the fact that the cities are becoming warmer, there's temperature increase, there is less rainfall, or rather there's too much of rainfall, and thereby there is flooding in the cities, etc. And all of that is because of the climate change. And all of that will be affected by the fact that if the third pole is not really taken care of. So, in your words, what would you think about this demographic, the dangers that are cropping up?
Yeah. Okay. First, I'm very happy to be here, and I think when I came in here, the quality of the infrastructure and students, etc. So I think very happy to be here, and impressed by the way that this has been set up. So very glad. Let me just step back a bit, and I think I'll just pick up the specific point. Is I think fundamentally, I think the way to address this, in my view, is to take this as an and question, not an or question. And I'll step back what Mr. Ramadurai also mentioned, that development or maybe corporate action, sustainability, CSR, all have to come together. Has to be addressed with one frame, not an isolated frame, because systemically it will not work, right? And at the heart of it, and I think one could look at it that Mr. Bothakur talked about, is it technology aid, is it digital aid, and perhaps this is the energy age. So the energy transition will be at the heart of addressing this. And if what Richard mentioned, 70% is fossil fuel related, direct correlation to what we are talking in climate change point of view. Energy transition, even if you don't take the carbon lens, is a very, very important transition to happen. And now we address it as a reality of this country. We are still developing. Still, we need to address the issue of energy poverty in this country. So I think in a lot of ways, not to be tutored by the West with the lens of saying that, look, what a transition needs to be from their lens, but what is it for our lens? And hence, the transition to renewable energy is absolutely one of the key things to do as a country. And the second dimension is distributed energy. Is all the way that we have been speaking, big assets, big ways of generating electricity, can I give it to the unit and make it absolutely affordable? And that, I think, in the large measures as a country, from a policy framework, we are getting there. I'm talking about rooftop solar. I'm talking about distributed solar. And hence making sure that, look, some of those development needs are also not framed at the back, because I think that debate has to go along with each other. Now, in a lot of ways, you talked about this environmental led transition, and I'll take the little bit of a different lens. And I think some of you are aware that in the transition of what is happening is framed in the Paris Agreement of just transition. And a lot of that will be how we take the transition with dignity. And again, whether it is a transition from urban to rural, either way, or moving away from traditional things like coal to newer industries like solar or EV, the heart of it, in my view, is skilling. And Mr. Ramadurai has been talking about it from decades, possibly is an icon of this space. I think skilling is the heart of it. And again, the corporates like us, I think, have to figure out on three things. One is, first, absolutely is employment. And again, this is partnership, employability, and employment. I think all these three are made from a corporate action point of view, but also from a community action point of view. And I think in a lot of ways, as Mr. Ramadurai said, some of our Tata companies, that is very, very much framed into the way we exist and do business. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll move back to Ramadurai sir. And we'd like you to tell us about, in your words, something which is not, I mean, this is a question which probably most people will not ask you. But, you know, this third pole has a lot of cultural significance because it is important for both the Buddhists as well as the Hindus, as well as for the rest of the world. And what do you think that, you know, the degradation of the third pole in terms of environment, what kind of effect do you think it will have on the people and these cultures which are pretty ancient and have been there for so many years?
See, when you look at the Himalayas, they stood as a sacred testament to the profound interconnection between humanity and nature. The melting of these glaciers, which Mr. Sangye articulated, is of extreme worry, and it does not belong to one country because that type of population that is dependent on it, he touched upon it. I think in a way this loss can be compared to the erosion of languages. Just as languages embody the community's worldview and history, sacred sites are the tangible expressions of a people's spiritual and cultural connection to the land. That's what we need to understand. And the destruction of such sites is not just a physical loss, but essentially an erosion of collective memory and identity, much like the extinction of languages that sever connections with ancestral knowledge and traditions. So we must embrace a more profound philosophical commitment to nurture identity and legacy. Conservation must transcend its scientific framework to become a holistic endeavor that respects the sanctity of these landscapes. Again, when you look at the Indian scriptures, such as the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, they speak of a cyclical nature of existence, where destruction and renewal are inextricably linked. So, in this light, this loss can be seen as a part of a broader cycle of transformation, where communities are called to rediscover their heritage through adaptation, innovation, and preservation of memory. So, just as languages can be revived through documentation and practice, so too can the sacredness of places can be maintained through modern platforms where the technology comes in to capture, share, and revitalize traditions, ensuring that they endure for a very, very long time. So we must involve and engage the indigenous communities and help them preserve the wisdom and traditions. That's very, very important. Digital platforms offer a powerful, like I said, you can create virtual archives of oral histories, rituals, and artistic expressions linked to these sacred sites. The essence of what is lost can be carried forward into the future with new forms of reverence and understanding. So they compel us to reflect deeply on our relationship with the natural world, which all of us have been talking about. It's a call to move beyond the transactional, recognizing that in protecting these symbols of faith and culture, we are preserving the very soul of humanity. Our actions today must ensure that future generations inherit and not just the land, but the stories, wisdom, and spirit which we consider as sacred.
Thank you so much. While we are on this particular subject, Ranjit, may I just ask you for giving us a little understanding of what exactly Balipar Foundation is doing in terms of, you know, reviving old traditions, getting the people back to their roots, and also conserving and taking care of ecology along the way.
Yeah, so Naina, if you don't mind, let me just change this track.
Okay.
I think the question that you asked on cultural synthesis, etc., if we just take a round of from Lobsang to here, we'll
Yes.
get a better answer. What Balipara Foundation is doing is just a construct, and we haven't really done much of it. But one of the things Mr. Ramadarai was suggesting, is there a scientific, like in the North Pole and South Pole, there are scientific stations measuring all this. Is there such a thing in the third pole? Should we not be promoting that? So I think that's the only point that I would keep in the answer, for which I don't have an answer for what we are doing. So I'd
Right.
rather ask Lobsang to comment, because I think
Yes,
been right.
I think that would be lovely.
Yeah, I'm a jack of all trades. I wear my hats. So regarding culture and indigenous knowledge, it's interesting that the scientists study. Okay, most of the scientists, I'm not being rude. Most of the scientists are from the plains or from cities. Yeah, but they study mountains and mountain people and indigenous people. And then obviously the conclusion they come is from their perspective, right? Then finally, what they say, oh, the mountains has to be protected, the rivers have to be protected, the lakes have to be protected. Yeah, that's what indigenous people have been saying for thousands of years. That's their conclusion. And how to be protected, right? They say, no, we must fence all these forests. We must put bodyguards in these lakes and rivers. But indigenous people, what they say is, this lake is sacred. This river is sacred, the riverhead. This forest is sacred. Once you call it sacred, everybody starts showing respect. Even if you go to village, there's a small stream, and one of the shaman, whoever indigenous priest will say, this is sacred. Because everybody starts showing respect. Why? Because this is where they drink water. That's what they'll call it sacred. You see, there's a very indigenous cultural way of preserving mountains, and we are doing this for thousands of years. We don't need experts, right? So then, then if the lake or the mountain is more sacred, they say there's a dangerous spirit here. In Tibet, in a mountain area, when you climb mountain, they say, oh, you cannot ride horse, okay? You have to get off the horse when you climb that cliff, because this mountain has such a, what do you call, I don't know, ferocious deity. Dakini and Dakis, yeah? And then people get off the mountain. No one will dare cut a tree from that mountain because there's a ferocious deity, okay? That's how we protect our trees. There's indigenous law. Now, all the scientists are coming back and saying the same thing. You better protect. How? To fence it. You don't need to fence it. We already fence it with our deity. Once there's a deity, all the indigenous people, they don't dare cut a tree. So now you have chaprashis, all that, right? This is the external imposition. Had you leave it to indigenous people, the way they have been doing for thousands of years was already good, actually, So now scientists have to come to indigenous villages and learn from indigenous people first. How did you do it for thousands of years? Teach us. So that way, they learn from us. Then they're coming and imposing on us. Then obviously they bring corporate mining company. They say, yeah, for the sake of development, we'll cut the mountains and mine all your resources, right? Critical minerals. That's how the exploitation is happening. All come to the same conclusion what indigenous people have been saying for thousands of years. A solution is external imposition, which is the wrong method. So a lot to be learned.
Thank you so much. In fact, even in India, we have this whole concept of sacred forest right here in Meghalaya. So I'll move over to Dr. Milburn. And if you can give us your views on this same topic.
Yeah, thanks. So really a similar viewpoint. I think I maybe just take one step on as well is, these communities know what needs to happen. I also think we need to understand why. There's often, we ask the question, what do you do or what did you do? We don't necessarily ask why, and therefore see in a more modern context or a more commercial, like the mining company context, is there a way to take the underlying principle and actually scale it up? And I think the role for outsiders is more looking at how do you help those groups do what they do and what they know, at scale. So if it's localized, indigenous groups can usually solve it. If there are those sort of mining interests coming in, or if there's organized crime coming in to exploit, say, timber, an indigenous group can't protect against that. If people are coming in with AK-47s and you're just an indigenous community, you can't protect against that. So I think that's where outsiders then have that role to come in, understand what needs to happen and why, and learn that, and then have a discussion around, okay, how is the most effective way to deliver that? How can some modern technologies, understanding, experience help, uplift that indigenous and traditional capability. So I think, the outside, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's always some utility that can come in from the outside, but absolutely, it's about making sure we understand and the what and the why of those communities, so we help uplift that rather than imposing something. And definitely that imposition is the worst possible approach. But if we understand what people want to do and why, and we help them achieve it, I think that's the way forward.
Thank you so much. I'll come to you, Saurav. If you could give us an idea about the kind of, have you ever faced any kind of problems while working with these kind of communities, or in your, in the kind of work that you all do, have there any kind of issues cropped up because of that?
Thanks for that. Maybe I'll begin with the previous one and then lead into this one. One is, I really have nothing to add to what's already been said, because it's said so eloquently. I think about 10 years ago, we started a program called Samvad, which we didn't articulate it like this at that time, but now we realize that we are grappling with a fundamental inequation that we have spoken about. There are indigenous communities across the country in this part of the world who have answers to some of the most vexing questions that all of us face. Those answers are not in a language that we are familiar with. Those answers, we don't often have the technical, tools to understand those languages. So that's the RHS of this inequation. The left-hand side has to do with identity. You have entire communities who are from the indigenous communities, and their affiliations are now, for some reason, maybe for external expositions, becoming a source of diffidence, a source of agitation. And just imagine what this means for the planet. The people with answers that all of us should know are now not very confident of their affiliation. Unless we solve that, this is an underpinning inequation that's there for the world. And what we try and do is, we realize that we only need to have a process of dialogue. That's what I was trying to say, that get everyone on the same table and have a conversation. And I say this because since we are in an university, there are technical tools around participatory processes. How do you understand? What languages do you speak in? The point was made on languages by Mr. Ramadurai, and if I just speak of our country, we lose 1,400 languages, and of them about 800 odd are from indigenous communities. There's a challenge there. So unless you address that is, to my mind, that is pre-development work. And if that is got right, most of the solutions may not even be required. And the biggest challenge that we face is when we go out and work with indigenous communities. There are times when, we kick ourselves because almost for 3 or 4 years, we've been doing things the wrong way. And that is a challenge. Today, if, the difference between rag-based music, and non-rag-based music is mathematics. As mathematics, because indigenous communities don't want to be boxed in. You will sing Shivranjani, you will hit all the Western classical notes, but they will come at it from a different direction. And just imagine a child who writes 6 like this, but is beaten by the teacher because you have to write 6 like this. It's the same thing. It's like Tare Zameen Par, if you understand what I'm saying. So that's what's playing out. Unless we get this correct and have dialogue, which I think Balipada is also trying to do. So if I may take the liberty of saying that, it's germane, it's fundamental. Without this conservation, I don't think it's going to work.
Thank you so much for saying that, because exactly, because most of the times, I'm an academician, and most of the times when you're doing research, it's all about, especially when it comes to conservation, it's all about relearning things which are already known by the indigenous communities. We are just trying to put that into a design thinking process, if I may say so, and kind of, churning out lovely flowcharts, etc. But at the end of the crux of the matter, the people who are actually on the ground practicing those things, they already know it. And they've known for millions of years, or no, rather not millions. Sorry, I'm a geologist, I always talk in terms of million, for thousands of years at least. Coming to you, I would like you to just touch upon one more subject that I thought we needed to talk about, is that the smart irrigation, smart agriculture, all these smartness that we have added to all our otherwise daily rituals. Do you think that really has the potential of minimizing the problems that we are going to face with the third pole if we do not take care of it?
Maybe I'll have to absorb the question and maybe interpret it in the way that
Yes, yes,
I
absolutely.
take it. So I think in a lot of ways it is manifesting in various things, right? So even if you talk about what is the entire thing about consumerism today, look, I think we talk about, do we require all of this, right? And in the way that it builds is all of these things, are they required? So one can talk about whether this moment, and I think we are in front of a lot of young people, and I go and address university students. Minimalism is now talked about a lot, and I think we have gone to one extreme sometimes, but leave that aside. But I think the dialogue is there, and it comes from the way that, look, how we have evolved in this entire frame of the existing models of consumerism. Now, having said that, if you see today, and again, we go back and this entire thing about indigenous, in a lot of ways, we are going back to it. Now, I can say even in our eating habits, if you see the entire health trend to be, it's all indigenous, right? You tell me a trend, it is out of our grandmother's playbook, right? And it is going back to some of those basics, right? Now it is manifesting. Not, I'm taking one example. I think it is all in a lot of sustainable agriculture, sustainable construction. We're talking now sustainable engineering. Today when we look at mass scale construction happening, we are talking about some construction techniques that were used by some cholas some 1500 years back. Now all of those things are inherently sustainable, right? And they're coming back into manifesting in all of those things that are coming up. So my sense is it is the way to do it. And again, what he also mentioned is that, look, coming from outside in, and how can we tap into that dialogue and make them not from a preachy way, from a co-creation point of view. In a lot of ways, I think we all have a habit of going into communities and saying that this is the way to do it. This is how I have learned it, and I think you should learn it. And I think the frame has to be different. And again, a lot of us are learning the hard way.
Thank you so much. Prabir, I thought, if you could just shed a little bit of light on what you feel about this whole thing.
I think, can I just speak what I want to speak?
Yes,
I think it's very
absolutely.
important for the young minds, future leaders of tomorrow, to just understand the journey that organizations like Balipara Foundation undertake and what we would like to achieve, how we failed, and how little we've achieved so far. So the numbers are big. We started off as a three-man army almost 2 decades ago, led by the thought process of Ranjit and me and 2 others. Today we are close to 50 people. We've got brains, we've got scientists, we've got advisors. Most importantly, we have received lots of trust from our partners, our benefactors, and from the local communities. We are today working in 15 different sites in the Northeast. We are the custodians of, we've planted over 5 million trees, but we don't call them trees. We call them natural assets, because every tree leads to the rejuvenation of the entire ecological ecosystem, whether it's the soil, the water, the air, attracting pollinators, etc., etc., etc. We've benefited about 10,000 indigenous households with about 10 crores of rupees over the years. We work very, very closely with the youth and the women. We've got 11 nurseries today. We are the custodians of over 3 million saplings. We've got 5 seed banks where we've got 2.5 million seed banks. But our journey is just begun. And I hope with all that was said by the dignitaries here, the young minds, some of them will be inspired to come forward and join organizations, not Balipara Foundation, we are still very, very small, but organizations like Balipara Foundation, because I think it is the need of the hour. So I leave that thought with you, young minds. And I also want to leave one more thought with you guys. I've been crossing Royal Global University at least 500 times in the last few years. I came in here 2 months ago. And I hope you believe, as I do, that you people are in an institution that is second to none globally. And I truly want you all to believe that. And just carry on with your lives. Keep your eyes to the future, but feet on the ground. And Royal Global University will make leaders out of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sange, you had something to share.
Yes, I think is there a legal framework on how to address this issue? Unfortunately, no, because there is UN Convention on Water Sharing. Normally, upstream countries they sign the UN Convention and agree to share water with the downstream people, with neighbors. China has conveniently not signed it, so they're not obligated to share Brahmaputra with Assam or Northeast, right? Or Indus or Salwan, with Pakistan, or all the Mekong, all the rivers. So that's why all the downstream countries should get together and ask China what as a UN member is obligated to do. And in the United Nations Environmental Agency, they should also make a appeal and say our mayor, dear Mirza, right? They should make an appeal, openly say this. You should sign this, and you're obligated to share water. If you build 12 dams over Brahmaputra River, how would millions of people in Assam? Where will your machli kahan se aayega? Huh? So, this is a major issue. Now, I just want to because the refugee issue was raised, language was raised. There are 7,000 languages in the world. Every month, one language die. Every month. So why I say this, I'm sure there are a lot of indigenous people here in this room. If your language is simply vocal, not written, then your language chance of dying is much higher. And is local and written, if you have not preserved text, higher. And if you don't have a school, universities, higher and higher. So you should know that, okay? Now, as far as climate-related refugees, in 2004, when I finished my dissertation, there were 24 million refugees, of which 9 million were political, right? And the 15 million were climate-related. Now in this world, there are 135 million refugees, of which 25 million are political refugees, 111 million are climate-related refugees. So you should know this number. Why I throw these numbers? We all are students, right? To do research, you need numbers, okay? Now, finally, I want to end with Balipara Foundation also, because I feel very close to my friends here. I came here in 2017, and Balipara, we had the event, same event. I was the keynote speaker. Now you have got 8 keynote speakers, and many more in the other room, okay? And there were like barely 100 people. No, there are barely 100 people in that room. Now in 2024, they have partners all over, major events all over. It's becoming bigger. Means why I applaud Ranjit and the team is, we all think globally. We can talk big, but act locally. So also, the Balipara Foundation is very organic, indigenous, okay? It's your own. It's very much Assam, indigenous, organically built, thinking they all talk about around the world. We have to, हमें भी कुछ करना है, यही करना है. So this is act locally. That's where locals must be involved. Now this is a royal university, and we all are sitting like in a royal way. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm a gaonwala. Okay. I grew up in a small gaon called Lamada Basti. I've cut grass for our cows, clean cow dungs, helped my mother milk cows. I've gone to forest, cut wood, sometimes illegally running away from chaprasis, because we needed food, we needed wood. This multi and big companies, they come and cut thousands of trees. They have patta, license. We can't cut one tree for our own, wood at home, right? So I've done all that. So don't think that the royal people are sitting here on this dais, okay? Gaon wale log hai yahan pe bhi, huh? It's like you guys only. So from there I grew up, I went to Tibetan refugee school, just eating rice and dal, nothing else, okay? I barely had shoes during winter. Then went to Delhi University, classmates here. And then I went to Harvard Law School as a Fulbright. I barely could afford the prospect application fees. And don't feel bad, okay? I applied in 1994 to 9 law schools. All rejected me. And I improved my application in 1995. All 8 out of 9 accepted me. And then went on to do a lot of things. Then I got 16 years. I studied, did master's degree, PhD, worked there. Then I got elected as the president or prime minister of Tibetan government exile. I came back and served for 10 years. I've done my part. To Dharamsala, I worked with His Holiness Dalai Lama. Then I'm back at Harvard Law School as a lecturer now. So my point is, don't think that there are royal people sitting here. All our backgrounds are very local, very humble, like you guys. And if you work hard, if you cooperate and participate in Balipara Foundation, meet with scientists, you all will go on to become great scientists. You might be the ones who might save the third pole and Brahmaputra River. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ranjit, would you speak?
I think thank you all again. I think I just want to make 3 points. In our forum this time, we have actually picked up a community called the Wanchu community. The Wanchu community is fighting for their language recognition in India. So, sir, you will meet them today and you will find that they're on the border of Burma and India, but actually they originally came from Tibet. So those people have been dialoguing with them for 2 years and they're saying, देखो हमारा कोई सोचता ही नहीं हमारा बात हम वांचू है भूटान में थोड़ा अगर there is a little bit of survival but our script is not there. One of the reasons we did it because the biggest program is actually environmental security through biodiversity growth, not through growing trees. So that's an interesting community for everybody to see. They've been asking us for sponsorship of this movement of the language. I don't understand much of it, but I think we can actually look at it. Just to make this whole discussion on water, Tibet, third pole, simple, just to, in my words, simple. You know the Indus, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Mekong River, that's what was referred, the Wangho, the Yangtze Kiang, all these rivers actually emanate in Tibet. It is really the top of the world. And many years ago, there was a book written on the Shangri-La. I'd urge all of you to go into the net and see it. It's a fantastic book. It's about love, and this is the right age for it, by the way. So I think in that you get a reflection of this whole idea of how water and the water tower actually distributes this water. Third point I wanted to make, just to give you an idea, simple maths. I think people are using a lot of figures, but just to give you a dimension which is bigger than what has been said. There's 1.4 billion people in China, 1.4 in India. That's 2.8 billion. In Bangladesh, there is roughly 200 million. That is straight away 3 million. The entire ASEAN countries is 490 million. So that is already 3.5 billion. Actually, more than half the world, if you take Pakistan and if you take Afghanistan, where the rivers also go, the Pamirs, actually it's from the Pamirs to here, more than 4.2 billion people live around this and are dependent on this watershed called Tibet. It is so important that children like you understand what future you're going into. So I think it's not 3 million and 4 million, it's 4.2 billion people, 8 billion is the world. So more than 50% of the world lives around and is dependent on this water system. So keep that in mind when you're pursuing the future. Remember, it will be absolutely important. Last point is, the most earthquakes have taken place here in terms of disaster in the Himalayan sub-region, right from Uttarakhand to Kashmir to Himachal. But most important, remember the 1895 earthquake here and the 1950 earthquake. It was captured by an English guy called Kingdon Ward. The only reminiscence of Kingdon Ward, I don't know even if Richard knows about Kingdon Ward, but he is very well respected in Kew Gardens. He actually, the rhododendron plant, he was a king of rhododendron plants. He collected it from this whole sub-region and they put it in Kew Gardens. He basically wrote about this, and there's a nice song for everybody to sing. If I could sing, I would have sung it for you. Where the earth moves under your feet. This region is where the earth moves under your feet. And in 1950, he looked down, 50 or 51, and talked about this whole Brahmaputra river changing course. That is how serious it is when we talk about, it's not dams. It's about fighting with nature. It's about doing things which are anti-nature. So when people now talk about run of the river, people talk about other dams, and no reflection on Tata Power, because they're undertaking many such projects, especially in Bhutan. But I definitely think our planners and understanding of people are not there. The last point I make is, I would urge all of you to start what is called the measurement of natural assets. And that process, if you don't understand it, our leaders won't. The Prime Minister of India or the Prime Minister of UK or America, when they stand up and say, our natural assets are 20 trillion. And they say, my finance minister will now present our budget, and the finance budget is only 1 trillion. That 1 trillion is we're trying to go to 5 trillion. But our natural assets are 20 times more than that. And we never reflect it. That's not what we do. That's not how we live. So with that, I think I'll hand back to Sunaina. I'm sorry to have taken more time over your lunch. I'm the hungriest person right now. Thank you, Sunaina, and
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
panelists.
I think we've touched upon so many different facets of this problem. And it's not just a problem, but I think this is something that all of us should wake up to. And this is something that we have to live with and realize. And in any kind of action, I think, when awareness is key. And when you have that awareness, especially with young people like you, when the awareness is heightened, that's when action will actually take place. So I thank all our stalwart speakers here on stage. I am so honored to be on stage with all of you. Thank you so much for all the insights that you've shared with us. And I'm sure we leave a lot of impression on all these young minds out here today. Thank you so much, everyone.
I would like to request the panel member, would you be interested in taking one or two questions which probably the students might have? It's up to you.
Absolutely. I think that would be lovely.
Are we open for one or two questions?
So my question is like, so is there any role of AI in this topic?
I think today AI is touching everything. We talked about data and the volume of data which you need to gather and then build the large language models using that data is going to be one of the biggest opportunities, and that's where AI plays a very critical component. It's a limitless ability to propagate all the ideas that we want, scientifically prove, including capturing some of the knowledge of the past and then make sure it's visualized through AI agents. So I think just your imagination, when you look at the startups that are emerging in the AI area across the world and more importantly in our own country, that's where the most of the action is today, along with the academic community. So this university must definitely invest in that kind of area so that the ideas flow, and being close to the similar region, it gives you a bigger opportunity, in my opinion.
So yeah, it's kind of integrated into everything. There's one thing I'd say, that tech is a capability multiplier, not a capability itself. And I think sometimes that gets missed. People think, oh, just use AI and we'll magically solve it. So there's also a digital literacy piece, but it's in everything from even satellite imagery being used with ground sensors to automatically calculate the carbon sequestration of natural capital to then make it easier and cheaper to get carbon credits into communities. So that's one example. I think also it's looking at a slightly more tangential approach, that AI and tech in general might not always be used as a sensor to protect the environment or to work out glacier change. It might be used in education to expand access to knowledge and testing and assessment to uplift people's capability to then go into the environmental space. So I think with that, it's looking at that bigger picture of how AI can be used, even in like gamification, which is something I work on. So getting that process to enable people to model what they might do, then have an AI piece automatically processing that element. So you can test something in a digital space before spending the money and taking the risk in the physical. So it's all over, both directly and indirectly.
And I think, using AI and machine learning in any of this will give you the projection studies at the end of the day. Because without the projection studies, you really don't know what exactly you must do. So it's like Dr. Milburn said, that it's an aid. It's definitely an aid, but it's not going to solve all your problems. But yes, like Ramadurai sir said, that it is also about the scalability of the data and the huge amount of the big data that we are now working with. AI will definitely make things easier.
Last
Second
question.
question.
Good afternoon, speakers. So I'm from MBA, and hello, and my question is to Sir Lobsang. So as you have talked about international cooperation among different countries to preserve the environment, my question is like, how do we protect the international water from exploitation? Like for example, like China has been exploiting their water resources in different forms. So which authority of the world is going to regulate them? And since they are a permanent member of the UN and they don't, as you have said earlier, they don't themselves get to regulate themselves. So which authority apart from UN will try to regulate China's deep sea exploration?
I know that's a big challenge. For example, Tibet, again, as Ranjit says, source of rivers, all the major rivers, okay? China is building not just 1 or 2, 10, 20 dams. Tibetans don't need any more hydropower because we have enough energy. But the more dams are built to generate hydropower for Chinese companies and Chinese, to enrich themselves, and the party member and then business people, and then, send all the hydro. So there's exploitation. But then some say if the dams are not built properly, their lifespan is around 30 plus years, right? Then it's a threat. And then when you build dam, you have to remove thousands of people. You have to swamp, actually, essentially the villages after villages and monasteries, nunneries, disappearance of culture and history. It's a major problem. So that's why I think, being here, as I said, there has to be coalition from all the way from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, all the way to Vietnam. It's a downstream countries. China should sign UN Convention on Water Sharing. And then based on that, UN environmental agency should make China accountable. Why are you building all these dams? So the problem is, Tibet has always served as a buffer zone. Right? Now, it's not just His Holiness Dalai Lama is saying we have to make Tibet a natural reserve for both man and animals, okay? Even the Chinese environmentalists have said, we have to call Tibetan Plateau the third pole national park. Because it's for Chinese sake, Chinese people's sake, Tibetan Plateau is that important. But the Chinese government is not even listening to their own environmentalists. Because so that's why now you take it to the United Nations, Security Council, they have veto power. You can't do much. The political is the case. But environmentally, because it affects, anywhere from 2 to 3 billion people in this, region. So this will be a people's based interest to compel and persuade China to do something environmentally sustainable for the sake of humanity and of this region. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. But you start with the local people and then appealing to United Nations and different government coming together and voicing the same concern.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhu.